I'm Andy Hudson. I'm the North Carolina State Chair for the ICA, and I have the tremendous honor to introduce our first presenter. Not that Julia Heinen needs any introduction. Julia Heinen teaches at California State University Northridge, where she ran an outstanding Clarinet Fest in 2011. And she's also the state chair coordinator and the state California chair for the ICA. She's an outstanding performer. Her bio speaks for itself. I love that she's a buffet artist like me, but she's also an artist for Diodario and for Silverstein. And she's just an incredible person and has done so much to make our organization thrive. So please join me in welcoming Julia Heinen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today and letting Clareidoscope into your lives on this lovely Saturday. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do a quick talk about how, why, and the importance of warming up. So, what's really good about warming up is that we should be doing it every day. Oh, I've got to figure out. Oh, here we go. Okay. What equipment do you need to warm up? You need a metronome, a tuner, a drone, which is something that plays a fixed pitch for you, and you need a reed soaking glass. So while I'm warming up every day, I actually am going through all of my reeds and making sure that I'm playing all of my reeds every day. I don't know if you know this, but you have to play all of your current reeds for at least 5 minutes every day to keep them in playing shape. So what's the first thing I do when I warm up? And I should talk about there are 4 basic muscle groups that I'm worried about when I'm warming up. And the first group are the largest group, my group of largest muscles, which are my breathing muscles. So I'm going to do long tones first, and this is one of the examples of the long tones that I do and my students do. But I practice by warming up my large group breathing muscles. I'm also working on setting my support and making sure everything's working. I'm working on my sound production. I'm working with this particular exercise on smooth register connections. I'm working on my breath control, and I'm playing through my reeds. So I've got one reed soaking while I'm playing the first reed. And then as soon as I'm done with this set of long tones, I change to my next reed. So I'm going to go through all of my reeds. The second set of long tones are chromatic long tones that I do. And why do I do these? I'm still warming up my breathing muscles. I'm working on timbre control for the full range of my instrument. So in the previous set of long tones, I'm working on that my registers match from register to register. So in this case, when I start, it's my Chalumeau register to my clarion. And then in this set of long tones, I'm working on timbre control from half step to half step, making sure that they match. I'm working on breath control again, and I'm working on range expansion. So this particular sheet is the example that I give my students. And I get them within their first semester to get up to a high C. Personally, I warm up to a high F sharp above this. So I want to make sure that the highest note that I'm playing in private is at least a third above any note that I have to play in public. And so since I've had to play E flats, high E flats in public, I'm going up to that G sharp above that. Okay, the next group of muscle I'm going to warm up are my smaller group muscles, so my finger muscles. The first thing I want to do are adjacent finger motions. So I practice major and minor scales, and I use the Closset scale page to do this. Quickly go through my major and minor scales, and I do this page 3 times through, very slowly, a medium speed, and a fast speed. So finger control I'm working on, adjacent finger motions that one finger at a time is picking up. And why do I do these? Because I find scales in repertoire are just something that I just have to be able to do. Every single piece of repertoire I pick up has major and minor scales in it. So I always start very slowly. And to me, practicing, warming up and practicing, I do 10 times the amount of time in slow practice that I do in fast practice. So I want to really make sure that I'm working on these. The next set of adjacent finger motions I do are chromatic motions, and those are a little bit more complicated than diatonic, so that's why I do them after I do diatonic scales, and I use this Langinus exercise to do it. And you can use any kind of chromatic exercise you want, but what I love about this one is it starts out with a chromatic range that goes from low E up to high C. Second section of this works from high C, works into the altissimo, high C up to high G. The third section of it goes over the throat tones and crossing the break. And the fourth section is finally a full range chromatic scale. I do the same thing with this. I do it very slowly, I do a medium speed, and I do a fast speed. So these are more complex. I make sure that I'm very careful about always using chromatic fingerings in this exercise. And I make sure as I'm going through my repetitions, as my speed is getting faster, that I am not sacrificing anything in breath support or tone quality or timbre control. I'm just making sure everything matches. And again, I spend more time practicing slowly than I do fast. The next thing I go to are non-adjacent finger motions. So I go to scales, major and minor scales in thirds, diatonic scales in thirds, and this is just one example of something that I do. These are more complicated finger motions. I'm often picking up 2 or 3 fingers at a time. I'm doing more complicated motions. Oops, my page is clicking through here. So I start slowly. I do a slow speed, a medium speed, and a fast speed. And I'm spending more time with slow speeds than I'm doing. Why do I practice scales in thirds? Because in repertoire clarinet, I see scales in thirds all the time. I also practice chromatic scales in thirds. And if you're looking for that, it's in the Behrman Foundation Studies, the David Height edition of that, the David Height edited version of that. He has chromatic scales in thirds, or you don't actually need any music to do it. You can just do them from memory. So I practice 2 kinds of chromatic scales in thirds, chromatic major thirds and chromatic minor thirds. And really, again, slow, 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 always. Next thing I practice, diatonic arpeggios. So major and minor arpeggios. Here's an example from the Langinus book that is a wonderful example. There's also a great example in the Closet book, but this quickly runs through all your arpeggios in major and minor. And you can quickly get through it, slow, medium, and fast. So I've done my breathing muscles, I've done my adjacent finger motions, I've done my non-adjacent finger motions, and the last group, the last muscle that I want to warm up are my tongue muscle. So I use this from the Articulation Studies number 11 from the Langinus method book. And I start again very slowly. You'll see that this says 8th note at 144. Personally, I start at 8th note at 72, and I keep going up by 10s and 20s as fast as I can. And I'm up into the 235 to 242 range with doing this exercise. And so speeds just keep increasing, but I spend time going slowly. I make sure that the tip of my tongue is hitting on the tip of the reed. I'm practicing for tonguing consistency and speed. I do many, many, many repetitions of this. And again, I'm spending time slow, 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 reinforcing basics, and then I keep up and go with the speed. And let me tell you, your tongue is something that likes to not keep speed the older you get. So this is what used to take me, I would say, 7 minutes of practice is now taking me about 11 minutes of practice. That's okay. I don't care. So here's some questions I'm going to ask and answer about warming up. How long should you warm up? What a great question. The length of warming up should be about 25 to 30% of your practice time. So my warm-up routine takes me about 52 minutes. Why memorize your warm-ups? Because you don't really want to be spending your time reading music while you're doing this. You want to have your oral skills focused on what you're sounding like. And if I'm concentrating on looking at something, then I have less concentration to spend on listening to myself doing it. And here's the secret reason. I actually can also do like other things while I'm warming up. Like one thing I often do is, I'll read the newspaper on my electronic version while I'm doing something, and it's like then I can pay attention to what I'm sounding like, but also make sure that I am getting myself into this very calm and zen state. Why these exercises? These are what I use, and I use extended varieties of these, but these are what my students do. Can you do less? Yes, you can do less. You can choose to break this up if you don't want to spend this kind of time. You could do one day you could do all of your sharp scales. The next day you could do all of your flat scales. You can divide things up into halves. Can you do more? Absolutely. You can. What I end up doing after I do my tonguing etudes is I practice double tonguing and I practice circular breathing. So those are actually, and then I also practice skills that I need that are for upcoming performances. Simplifying your warm-ups, just like I said, you can split them up into doing sharps scales one day, flat scales the next day. Are there more advanced versions of warming up? There absolutely are. What you're looking at here are what I give my students. Personally, I actually extend everything up to 3 octaves. So which includes my arpeggios. So I'm practicing all of my arpeggios, major and minor, plus my fully diminished 7 chords up to high E flat. Just because I like to make sure that I can do everything 3 octaves. Why use a metronome, tuner, and a drone? Okay, I use a drone pitch to make sure that I am actually hearing myself playing against a steady pitch, because things as you're warming up, your pitch can be altered. So I want to make sure that there's something that's giving me an actual pitch that I can tune against. The tuner, I do use a tuner. You can see my little Korg tuner. You can't, but it's a little Korg tuner here. I actually purposely put it in a place where I can't watch it. If I need to refer to it, I have to turn to look at it, because my first instinct is I want to be able to tune with my ears. And the metronome, because I want to keep myself honest and I want to know exactly what I have to do. Now, the most important thing, what do I practice immediately after warming up? I practice any kind of technical passage or sound passage or something in a piece of music that I have coming up in an upcoming performance that I actually need to spend concentrated time on. There is at no point in my practice, except immediately after warming up, that I have now touched every note on my clarinet many times. My reeds are warmed up. I am ready to go. Then I jump into actually, okay, I need to do this measure here, this movement here. I need to do these 2 measures here. I need to do this 4 measures here. I need to work on playing smoothly from this note to this note to this note in tune. That's when I take all of those kind of places, and I show my own students this, but I use little sticky notes, and so I practice what I call my sticky notes right after warming up, and then I start practicing for full movements of things or full sections of things. Okay, what questions do you have? I saved just a few minutes, so you can ask me any questions you would like. You can stick them in the chat and I can see them. My total practice time, that's a great question. My total practice time is until I get done with what is on my to-do list of that day. And I keep a practice list. So what I do when I finish practicing on any given day is I write the list of what I need to do the next day. And it depends on the day, but I'm going to say in a roundabout way between 3 and 4 hours. So the drone that I use, great. Okay. The drone that I use is actually, my metronome has a drone, but I don't use that one. I use a one that I've downloaded from the internet, and it's called the Tuning CD, and it plays every pitch in 5 octaves. So at no point am I having to move an octave thing. It's playing it in a 5 octave simultaneous thing. So it's called the Tuning CD, and you can download it from iTunes. And you can use the free version, which plays each pitch for 30 seconds, but if you download the version, it plays each pitch, I think, for 3 minutes and 33 seconds a piece. What do I do with my sticky notes? When I'm having trouble with something for any reason, I put a sticky note on it and I write down, what am I doing on this? What's the issue? Do I need to work it up to tempo? Do I need to do something else with it? And then I go through, and I actually have colored sticky notes. So pink ones for me are ones that are in the rawest state. And then I go to yellow, and then I go to green and blue. And so I write on the sticky note, what do I need to do? I need to work this up, and I'm at 82 right now. And I need to get it to 172. Okay, so I actually just keep track on the sticky note. Let's see. Yes, I'm happy to go back to diatonic arpeggios. So I practice my arpeggios. I do break them up. First thing I do are my fully diminished 7 chords because they're quicker for me to get through. 3 octaves each from low E up to E flat, 3 octaves the entire time. And then I go back and I start on low E and I practice major and minor, 3 octaves up and down. Let's see, do I do anything specific with rhythms and timings besides using the metronome? On my long tones, I work them down. So you'll see on my warm-up sheets, it says 60 to the quarter note. I actually work them down so that I can do long tones down to 35. What does it look like if I practice multiple times a day? I only warm up once. So I warm up first thing when I'm in the morning, and then I'm good to go for the rest of the day. I do not do my full warm-up every single time. Do I practice my articulation study from 72 to 202-ish, the 200s every time? Yes, but at the slower speeds, I'm doing carefully, and then I'm going by bigger chunks in the middle, and then I get up to the high speeds, and I'm going actually one metronome mark at a time. For me, it's actually the spending time slowly, spending time fast, but spending the total amount of time, because your tongue is a muscle that gets worn out really quickly. And I think, Andy, am I out of time? Yes, I am.
Yes, that was wonderful, Julia. Thank you. And Jessica said if you send her the slides, she can add them to the ICA website so participants can follow up.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. Bravo.
Okay, so I think I've got a sort of a TED Talk length presentation here. Try to keep it to about 10 minutes and then maybe some questions at the end. Talking about articulation and phrasing in the opening of the Mozart. So I thought perhaps the best thing to start with is just play you a little bit of the opening. So I'm going to share my screen with you, which has also my new edition of the Mozart, so you can see it as I play it. First, let me share the screen from my iPad. This just takes a second. The iPad. And then we go here. And you tell me when you can see it. One more second. It should be there. Okay. So you should be seeing my score now. And then I'm going to play just a little bit of this opening, and then we'll start to talk about this. So here's the opening of the Mozart.
We're not hearing anything, Jonathan.
Okay, so already this new edition that I did is based on the only existing fragment of Mozart's actual writing, which is called the Winterthur manuscript. I'll show you a picture of that briefly. This is Mozart's handwriting right there, okay? And we can see right in this manuscript, for example, the articulation at the beginning. He writes 2 slurred, 2 dots, and that's played by the violins at the very beginning. So he is setting up the precise articulation that he wants. In fact, every time this phrase repeats, he keeps marking the 2 dots. So those 2 dots are very important. So when we go to play it, I'll pull up the clarinet part now itself, so we can just focus in on that. When we go to play it, it's very important that we follow that. And very often I hear people playing this because they want to sound oh, were you not? Oh, perhaps you were not hearing me. Let me see. Okay, so we heard that opening now. Now, we see that the phrasing is marked by Mozart in the manuscript with the 2 dots staccato. And this is very important. It's fundamental. It's kind of the motif of this whole first movement. And many times and the violins introduce it first. So when we come in, the melody has already been played. It's done with 2 up bows, D, da, 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 up, down. And we often hear people who want to try to play it very long and pretty, and they'll do. But this is already counter to what Mozart has marked. We know, first of all, what the violins sound like when they play it, and we know what he wrote. So he wants a little staccato on those notes. It doesn't have to be aggressive, but it's a little staccato. And because he was an opera composer, the phrases always have to go up and down with a natural inflection, as if you were singing words. So even on the very first note, we don't play with straight air. We don't play, because that's anti-operatic and it's anti-phrasing. We have to have a direction on every note. So the first note comes down to the E. And then the E goes up to the A. Has to rise up without a break. So and then as we repeat the fa, re, whenever anything is repeated in Mozart, the tradition was you have to make a sequence out of it. So it has to get stronger, and it goes into the appoggiatura on the C, and it resolves. So you'll see where I've put in little dynamic markings that weren't explicitly written by Mozart, but they've been implied by the structure of the piece. Now, the next important feature is this lift. If we go, I'm not going to go back because it takes too long, but if you went back to the manuscript, you would see that Mozart, when he first wrote this, actually wrote from the upper octave G to the F. And the tradition in that time was when you had a 2-note, 8th note slur followed by another note, there was often a little lift. So when we play, we don't play it in a legato connected way that we would for Brahms or Schumann, for example. So it's not, it's almost the opposite of that in Mozart, which matches what the violins have already done at the beginning, too. So we have, and the second beat is the emphasized beat, because, again, it's the appoggiatura, just like in the classical period, the appoggiatura is strong, the resolution is weak, unless it's a final cadence, basically, with few exceptions. Now, so when we come to that F, we come back, and then we resolve the phrase. Another thing that's worth noting is in this phrase here, people often play this as, which changes around the melody, because the melody is actually, as stated by the violins at the beginning, there is no D in the original statement of the melody. It's just like that. So instead of emphasizing the D, the phrase should go all the way into the G. Sorry, I'm blowing out a little water here. We'll go all the way into the G, not, because then if we emphasize it that way, it would imply that the D is part of the melody, and it's not. In fact, Mozart marks that D as a grace note if you look at the Winterthur manuscript. I'll quickly show you that once again so you can see that. Let's see, where is it? When the clarinet comes in, which is well into here, here it is, right here. You see the grace note? So that D is not even actually written as a 16th note by Mozart. It's written as a grace note. It's less important. It's just an ornamentation. And so when we do that phrase, the phrase needs to go to the G where the harmony changes. Let me bring you back to the clarinet part again, where we were. Okay. So and even Mozart marked, even to the level of detail that, for example, Mozart marked this slur exactly like this, with a tongue here and a tongue here. So we follow that. He actually marked that. There are certain places where he doesn't bother to mark things, and we have to come up with our own creative ideas. But one of the interesting things is when we come to this point here, he has a bunch of slurs in these previous measures, but when he comes to here, he marks these all separate. And the orchestra starts playing bop, 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 bop. So I choose to interpret that as a place where we're going to play more of a forte. Now, some people might find it challenging to tongue that fast. I myself cannot tongue very fast. So we solve it by working around with what's called multiple tonguing. There's going to be a session later on taught by Bob Spring where he's going to tell you all the details of that. But basically what I do there is I single tongue the first 5 notes, and then I triple tongue the last 3, which gives me a little extra energy so I can go as fast as I need to at the end of that scale. I'm doing da-ga-da-da. And if I need to, I can go as fast as I need to. So the first ones I'm going da-da-da-da-da and then da-ga-da-da. So, and that way I can make that sound very easy without struggling. Next piece of articulation, this is actually marked exactly like that in Mozart's own hand. So that's a portamento. It's not a staccato, it's not a total legato, it's somewhere in between. And then we have this interesting phrase where you have an upward leap of a sixth and then coming down. So here I choose to make the upward leap in a slur, the coming down in a staccato, and again I use the triple tongue at the end to, let me turn off my alarm clock here, to give me the extra speed. So with a triple. So and that gives you all the speed you need, even if you can't do it with a single tongue. If you're blessed with a super fast single tongue, you could do the whole thing single tongue. But most of us, it's quite difficult when you're doing it at about 130. And so with the triple tongue, you can do it exactly as you please. So that gets us to the end of the first passage. One last little comment, and then I'll take questions. The trills in Mozart's time start on the beat from the top note with a slightly lengthened appoggiatura. So when you play this, I usually tell people to think of that almost like an eighth, quarter, and 2/16, where this is your grace note, the trill is on the quarter, and you have the 2/16. So you go, and in time that's, so that's the opening of the Mozart Concerto. I'll unshare my screen, and if people have questions, you can put them in. This, oh, by the way, this clarinet I was playing, which you can sort of see through the background here, is the Bassett clarinet that I recorded this on. And this edition of the Mozart Concerto is my edition, which you can buy if you can sort. Let me turn off my background so you can see these. Unfortunately, with the beautiful virtual background, you can't see stuff. Okay, there we are. So here's the edition of the piece. And this is the Royal Global Bassett Clarinet, one of our sponsors. It's a beautiful Bassett Clarinet, goes down to low C, has all those extra keys. So put your questions in the chat. Let me see what's there. Anybody have any questions here? Let's see. Okay. Did we get the... there's a new message. Let's see. Oh, they're down here. What? Let's see. The biggest challenge between the A and the Bassett. Well, when you switch over to Bassett, which is what it's originally written for, you have to learn how to play a couple of extra keys. The hardest thing is this thumb key in the back. So you actually have to use your right thumb to play the low C. And then there's a bunch of extra keys here. So there's low E flat here, low C sharp here, a third key, and low D on the left. And one thing that's annoying is that these keys are only on one side, unlike our low E, low F sharp, etc., which are on both sides. These keys are only on one side, so you have to learn how to play it that way, no matter what. So your low D is always on the left, the low C sharp is always on the right. So that's one of the challenging things. The Winterthur manuscript you can get from the Winterthur State Library. I just wrote to them and asked them to send it to me, and they emailed it to me. Someone's asking about the target tempo. When I recorded this, by the way, my edition also goes along with my recording, so it matches my edition and score and parts matches exactly this recording that I made. So if you get the recording, you can hear it in action. But the tempo that I put in the part is about 128. When I performed it on my CD, I probably did it around 132, maybe a little faster. But I think a brisk tempo is good and was implied in Mozart's time. He tended to do things quite quickly. He was one of those players like Mendelssohn who could play very fast. Yeah, it's not exactly like a bass clarinet. I'll play the scale down here if you can see my fingers. Sorry. It's hard to play with the clarinet up in the air like this. And then you see? So, and those lowest 4 or 5 notes are only on one side of the clarinet, so you have to learn how to do that. Great. Did I answer all the questions there? I think so. Great. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here, and hope you learned a little something about the Mozart.
Hello, my name is Beth Wiemann. I'm the state chair for Maine, and I'm here to actually introduce our next speaker, who's going to be Professor George Stoffan from, he's the state chair of Michigan, and he teaches at Oakland University there. So I think you are able to share your screen fine. So we'll be keeping track of the questions in the chat.
So I was saying that as I was sitting here, I received my Clareidoscope t-shirt in the mail. So that was great. Thank you for that introduction. I remember my first experience studying the second movement of the Mozart Concerto with my teacher, and we worked in Heine Voxman's concert and contest collection. I was in 7th grade, and this was one of my first experiences with music outside of method books. I later studied other works from Voxman's collection, and looking back on it, I think this was all really valuable because up until this point, we'd spent a lot of time on fundamentals, a lot of tonal and technical work. So this was a chance for me to apply my fundamental work to good repertoire. So my study in this collection helped me begin developing my interpretive skills as well. Some of these works are staples of the repertoire. The Mozart, the first of Schumann's fantasy pieces, and the third movement from Brahms' F minor sonata, but many are not. Many of these works are based on appealing melodies borrowed from lesser known works and particularly from the opera repertoire. I've worked with many middle school and high school students preparing performances of works from this collection for solo and ensemble festivals and competitions, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And I have observed some of the same or similar challenges that every student faces in a few of these solo works. I'm going to share a few of these challenges now and offer some solutions. You might see how some of these solutions can be applied in other contexts, and I hope that what I share here will be helpful in your work as a performer, teacher, or clarinet enthusiast. So for the brief time we have, I'm going to offer a few suggestions regarding connecting intervals, establishing even technique, and playing with light articulation. So I will draw examples from Nocturne by Luigi Bassi, Allegretto Fantasia by Sextus Miskow, and Scene in Air from Luisa de Montfort by Michael Bergson. So in the opening of the Nocturne, we need to connect these octave A's. And when we're doing this, usually one of two things happens. Or, so in the first case, the note doesn't come out, doesn't speak. Second case, it pops. So my first suggestion is to play with more sound on the lower note and less on the upper note. This accounts for the natural acoustics of the instrument. The lower note is naturally softer, while the upper note is naturally louder. So if we give more sound on the lower note and less on the upper note, we're compensating for the natural physics of the instrument. My second suggestion for this is to crescendo and move the air through the notes. It builds upon the concept of playing with more sound on the lower note and less on the upper note. We just need to be sure that as we do this, we temper the arrival of the upper note so it doesn't pop. Finally, assuming one has good equipment and is well set up with the embouchure, that just a slight release from the lip pressure on the top and the bottom, just slight, might be just enough to allow the reed to vibrate in a way so that the reed can speak and so that we can make a smooth connection. So in order to more smoothly connect octaves, play with more sound on the lower note, move the air between the notes, and release any top to bottom lip pressure just slightly to allow the reed to vibrate naturally. Now keep in mind, we just can't blow more and harder and think we're making music. Making large intervals work is related to the mechanics, but it's not musical necessarily. The music happens between the notes, and we have to remember that. I like to think of intervals as spaces we need to fill with expression. We should always sing through the instrument. And I know these are common cliches, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that the human voice is our model for expression in passages like this. The third and fourth measures of Miskow's Allegretto Fantasia contain these 16th note passages that I often hear performed unevenly, something like this. So my first suggestion is to practice slowly. This allows you to experience the passage in slow motion. I suggest this for two reasons. it allows you to find each note, centering the fingers squarely over each note, over the tone holes, and cleanly, so that you can feel the passage, you can feel the clarinet. The second reason is to emphasize the use of one's air column so that you play each note evenly and you connect and you build a phrase. So when you focus on sound production and the connection and the phrase in general, you're getting more response from the instrument. And this response better enables the coordination of the fingers. Second suggestion involves beat-to-beat work. We may not be able to play up the tempo at the beginning of our work and our passage that we're working on, but we can sometimes play a single beat in tempo accurately and evenly. And in this case, if we use the eighth note as our beat and aim to play the first two notes leading to the downbeat of the following measure, the first note of the following measure in tempo, we can begin to develop good muscle memory. And we develop the muscle memory built on these short segments that come with beat-to-beat playing. So I do that many, many times in fast passage work, and then do the same with the following beat. And then we can connect these beats. And then we start to link these beats together until we've played the entire passage. So it's the result of achieving these small successes with a single beat, building on these small successes to create larger successes. In this case, performing our fast passage work evenly and musically. My third suggestion is more traditional, and you've probably done this. It's very typical. If you swing the rhythm, you're controlling your fingers in a very specific way. Then reverse the swing, the opposite. So once you straighten it out, it becomes a lot easier. So in order to help with the evenness of playing any fast passage, I suggest playing the passage slowly, working beat to beat, and swinging the rhythm. Finally, in scene and air in the coda, I often hear heavy articulation. So my first suggestion for this is to play it softer. With less mass in the sound, the tongue can work more lightly and more efficiently. Second, there are two parts. Use less tongue on the reed, variation of the idea of using the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed, or to think about touching the reed lightly, staying light to the touch. The third suggestion is to phrase, which seems obvious. We phrase on wind instruments through how we use our air. Specifically, if we harness our air column and direct our air, in this case through 4-bar phrases, we better enable the light to the touch approach to the reed I suggested a moment ago. I often say it's all about the phrase. This is a good example in which the musical solution also helps solve the technical problems. Finally, in this passage and passages like this, it's helpful to start slowly and build in tempo through the passage. This allows you to find your bearings, to establish coordination with the fingers and tongue, and to build momentum to an exciting ending. So for achieving a light but clear articulation in fast passages, play the passage softer, keep the tongue light to the touch, to the reed, phrase, and start a little slower and build towards the end if the phrase allows. hope that my suggestions here related to intervals, technique, and articulation in these short, simple examples might be helpful in your work in these pieces and can be helpful in your work with other repertoire as well. Thank you for joining me today and joining us for Clareidoscope.
If anyone would want to put some questions in the chat, we can maybe do a minute or so.
I like this book, and I use it a lot prior to introducing students to Rose because of the quality of the repertoire, the challenges that it addresses in a lot of young playing. And I think that it's very common for a lot of students to use this for competitions and festivals, as I mentioned at the beginning. So, and I think, and I hope that although this was very simple passage work, that you can apply some of what I said to some of the more complex repertoire that we're going to hear today.
Thank you very much, George.
Thank you, Beth.
I'm here to introduce Jorge Montilla Moreno from Iowa, from the University of Iowa, and he's going to tell us about the E-flat clarinet.
Hello, everybody. Well, it is such a pleasure to be here, and it's a challenge to follow Jorge after George. So well, I thought I was going to have to follow the Mozart Clarinet, but that Professor Cohler presented earlier today. So I'm just going to share my screen here. My presentation is called The Road from the B-flat clarinet to the E-flat clarinet. And I think where the B-flat clarinet stops, and I have my B-flat here with me, then we have a common register or a common range. Then we have the same notes on the E-flat that are a little bit more, just a little bit flatter than on the B-flat. I'm trying to keep them a little bit flatter in intonation. So I'm going to start, and I have just some talking points here. So how do you start playing the E-flat clarinet? And the E-flat clarinet, of course, is that small one, not quite the A-flat that is a little bit smaller. It's even smaller, like only like this. And this is not the D clarinet, so it's the E-flat clarinet. How did I start? I actually was playing the bass clarinet in the orchestra successfully, even for recordings in the orchestra. And then there was a time that we needed somebody to play the E-flat clarinet. So they asked me, do you want to try the E-flat clarinet? And I tried it, and I played it in the orchestra that week. And then after that, when I went up in the ascension, when I went to principal clarinetist, they say, but you have to play one of the two instruments. So which one do you choose, the E-flat clarinet or the bass clarinet? And I chose the E-flat clarinet because it was smaller and it was easier to carry. So I know it's a shallow, vain way to pick an instrument over the other one, but that's how it happened to me. I was relatively skillful with both instruments, so I chose the E-flat clarinet, and then I stuck with it. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit about this the bad reputation. And as I started playing the instrument, I started hearing people commenting about the E-flat clarinet. And the most common comments are, it's a loud instrument, it's an out of tune instrument, so it's an instrument that is bright, and it's too bright, it's too loud, it's too out of tune. And Well, it is, and it's most of the times it is how the instrument is. So how can you say that a crow is not loud and obnoxious if it is? So that is our challenge also, is to try to make it be a nice musical instrument, because it is a musical instrument, and we need to kind of go away from that bad reputation by trying to make it sound sweet and not so bright and not so loud, and try to fix things like intonation. So the soprano clarinet and the E flat clarinet, are they similar or different? Well, they are similar and they are different. So they are similar in which they belong to the same clarinet family. So they have a similar bore inside. They have the same kind of mouthpiece that uses a single reed. They have a ligature that attaches the reed to the mouthpiece, and it's played basically the same as a clarinet in terms of fingerings. So what makes it different? Well, to avoid these natural tendencies to be loud and to be out of tune, we need to find out other ways that makes the performance of the E flat clarinet different from the performance of the soprano clarinet. So I'm going to continue here. Now, playing the E flat compared to playing the B flat clarinet, the embouchure, the lips, and the voicing. And I try to see it as a continuation of the B flat. So whatever I have to do here, whatever I do for the B flat clarinet, I try to continue also and do it for the E flat. I try to lower the back of my tongue to favor the higher partials. I try to keep my embouchure straight, flat, chin, and also try to keep the lips. I use a little bit more lip for the E flat, just to tame a little bit of those crazy vibrations in the reed. And then there is something that I do more for the E flat than I do for the B flat, which is to keep the corners of my mouth more towards the mouthpiece. So as if when I'm playing a string instrument, I don't press so much down the string, or the flesh in the bow is not so tight, it's a little bit less tight. So I try to play the E flat clarinet more with this kind of embouchure, and then I try not to use too much biting. And that keeps the sound more round. It adds an extra level of darkness to the sound and makes it a little bit sweeter than it naturally is. Okay, so I don't do that so much for the B flat clarinet. So for the B flat clarinet, I have less use of the corners of my mouth against or towards the mouthpiece, and I bite a little bit more, and I tend to have a voicing that is more for the B flat. But for the E flat, then I do more of this. to keep the mouth more, the corners of my mouth more towards the towards the mouthpiece, and the embouchure a little bit more loose, if possible. So, talking about the reed strength, I have two reed strengths here that are similar. So, the B flat clarinet one is a little bit harder than the E flat clarinet one. So when I go back and forth, I feel like the B flat clarinet is a little bit stronger than the E flat. So this also makes that my sound is a little bit more, it's a little bit warmer, it's a little bit sweeter. Just for the E flat, I would not want to have a really strong reed, because that will make that I cannot control how hard, how loud I can play. And with a slightly softer reed, I can control the softer I can play, and I can control better the way I finish the note. Okay, so as far as articulation, I think they are pretty similar, and I believe lately in my life that the clarinets need to be the articulation needs to be played in different places of the reed, and with slightly different places in the tongue also, being that when I play the lower notes, I play more towards the bottom of the reed where it is in my mouth, and less the tip of my tongue. So as I go higher, then I start tonguing with more of the tip. So this is also the case for the E flat. For me, I think it works that for the higher note, I use less amount of tonguing. I use less amount of tongue to touch the reed, and I use exclusively the tip with a lot of air support. So I'm relying more on this than on the actually tonguing process. Okay, so I think that the articulation is a little bit needs to be softer, because also the instrument reacts easily and faster to the articulation. So if I tongue too harsh, then the instrument will play harsh. And then I need to So if I would play the same note on the B flat clarinet, it will take a little bit more of stronger tonguing for that E flat to sound. Okay, so my next topic is the intonation, and I think that, well, it's the typically the E flat clarinet is pretty much out of tune. So I think that most of this is about two things: fingerings that you can see here, fingerings, and also the height of the keys and pads. And now I'm going to attempt to show you in my camera what is the height of these pads. So you can see here, these pads are opening almost nothing. So the other ones are this one for the B flat. You can see it here. that it's not opening too much. So when at a point that my clarinet was playing those notes too sharp, all I did was to add more cork to that key and to stop it sooner, and then the intonation went down immediately. So I got this from a colleague a long time ago that put in her E flat clarinet little pieces of candle wax inside the tone holes just to bring the intonation down. I also discovered that this one here, this mechanism that is all controlled by this key here, and it can be regulated by adding cork here. So all this mechanism is sometimes too high, opens too much in all the E flat clarinets, making notes like the B and the C too sharp. And then we have all these notes that are too sharp, and then we have this note that are typically flat in almost all clarinets. So for the E flat clarinet being so high in any texture of a Mahler symphony or Shostakovich or Strauss or Stravinsky, then you need to be actually a little bit sharper in intonation in some of these clusters, because the human ear doesn't recognize when it's completely in tune. It sounds to the human ear like it's a little bit flat. So actually people like to hear these notes just slightly sharp. So for this, we need to try different fingerings. So one of my favorite fingerings is for this E, to either have the sliver key or to be played like a G plus the G flat key. Sorry, the A flat or the G sharp key. So they will be just slightly sharp in intonation, and they will sound okay for the human ear in those big passages of Shostakovich where the E flat clarinet is on top of everything, and then we have also the piccolo flute even higher than that. So some of these, the fingerings are available in the Peter Hadcock book of the orchestral studies for E flat clarinet, and there are some available also for in the internet fingerings. This will be fingerings that we don't use for the B flat clarinet, because the B flat clarinet with the piano, and when we play in orchestra, we want to have this note we want all those notes to be just in the green. So to be completely
Jorge, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, so
okay, I'm moving
so
fast.
we're gonna have to wrap it up.
So I'm showing here because another important aspect of playing the E flat clarinet is the reeds. So the questions are: do we play a B flat clarinet reed and cut the reed, or cut the barrel? And here is an example of a picture of a cut barrel. Or should we play E flat clarinet reeds? And my answer is to play E flat clarinet reeds, because they have been designed carefully to be good acoustically for this instrument. So with the B flat clarinet reeds that we cut or not, that we use one of these barrels or not, we gain some of the features of the B flat clarinet reed, and it can be a little bit warmer sound and it could be also a little bit of a sweeter sound. So my recommendation is to use the carefully made E-flat clarinet reeds. I say carefully made because some vendors produced these reeds. And there we have mostly the orchestra and bands are employers if we play the E-flat clarinet. And besides that, we have chamber music, which is not a rich medium for the E-flat clarinet. We have clarinet quartet and clarinet ensembles, including the clarinet choir. And then we have some emerging repertory for solo repertory. And then we have musicals that some of those books that they call have doublers for E-flat. So I think the solo repertory is growing up more and more, especially music with piano and music where the E-flat clarinet is a soloist with the band or an orchestra. And then I'm going to share. Yes. Yeah.
Perhaps we could share. Perhaps we can share your slides through the ICA because right now we are going to have to move on, Jorge. I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's what I was going to say. So
okay.
I'm going to share this with the ICA so you can see the list of repertory and then the of exercises too. So if you have questions now, I'm here, and if not, here's my email if you need to make.
So my next job is to introduce Robert DiLutis, who's going to be telling us about reed making. He's now teaching at the University of Maryland, has been for a while, but he also sponsored Clarinet Fest at Louisiana while he was the state chair there. So I see him getting ready. I'm told he has 3 cameras, so I'm just going to let him start.
All right, great. Can you hear me, Beth?
Yes.
All right, great. Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to make speed reads. So we're going to make reads as fast as we can because we have 20 minutes. Many people ask me all the time, what's the benefit to making your own reads? And the first answer I tell them, well, you can control every aspect of the read. And so making reads becomes a much more in-depth and enjoyable process because you learn all these skills that will help you if you do choose at some point to buy reeds in a box. So what I like to have my students do in the course that we teach at the University of Maryland is the first thing we do is we learn how to make a reed from the tube. So you can see the tube here. I have 2 cameras on the screen there. You can see on the one camera, you'll see the tubes. I'm going to switch my camera here to a close-up so you can see a little bit better what we're doing. Hopefully this will work. Now you've got a top view there of the tubes, and we're going to zoom in to the tube. Now if you look at the tube, you'll notice that the tube is a certain thickness. And so clarinet tubes can be split into 4 different pieces, and we usually mark an X across the top. All right. By marking an X, what we end up making are 4 different pieces. All right. And the first step is to split the cane with a chisel. All right. So we take the chisel and we just place it on top of the cane. And you can even do this with your hand. Some people prefer to use a mallet. All you're going to do is just tap on the top. And by tapping, you split the tube into pieces. All right, very simple process. You can get more detailed on that process if you prefer. You can check to make sure the tube is straight. You can check for warpage. You can do all kinds of things. Now, once you have a piece that's this long, this is a very long piece. That would be way too long for a reed. What you want to do is you want to measure 70 millimeters. I get lazy sometimes, and I just take an old reed and put it right next to it and mark about 1/8 of an inch or a millimeter longer than the reed. Now at this point you have a couple options. What you can do is you can cut this with a saw. You can buy a little saw, hand saw. You can get some rosebush clippers. I have a pair of clippers here, and basically you just put that in there and you clip it. And so now you have the beginnings of a reed blank. The next step, if you're not going to work with commercially available tools, would be to remove the inner part of the tube. So we have all this material on the inside of the tube, and we want to take that material out. So what we want to do is just draw a line from point to point. This side to this side. All that inner part here is too soft to be part of the reed, and will really produce a stodgy, very soft reed. So what we want to do is take the chisel and just put that across the reed and support it with your hand. And you're just going to tap that out. Now you could do this with sandpaper. You could just sand away until there's nothing left. All right, you want to just remove all that wood until you have a reed. It's going to look a little like a rough version. And I usually make about 4 of these at a time. It's going to look like a rough version of a reed. So there we have almost a blank. All right. The next step would be to take a reed that you already have. Reach over here. You can take a Van Doren or any kind of reed and place it on that blank you just made, and take your pencil and trace that angle. Remember that a reed is wider at the top and narrow at the bottom. So you want to make sure you get that taper on the reed. And these are basic steps. As you get more and more advanced, you can get into more detail. But today we're trying to just give you the basics of this. Now what we're going to do is just gently shave off some of the wood that's protruding past the line. Now when you cut clarinet reeds, you always want to go from wide to narrow, because the grain will actually follow the reed as you go. So I'll hold this up pretty close to the camera here. You can see we have a very rough bottom, but we have the beginnings of a reed. All right, the next step would be take your reed knife. Any kind is good. People ask all the time, which do I recommend? A double bevel is good, but the most important part is that the reed knife is sharp.
Can you move your camera?
Yeah, sorry. Which one are you looking at? Top
There's
view?
better.
Yeah, there you go. So just removing that part of the that was a little rough from the chisel. So now we have a flatter, I'll zoom in a little on that, flatter looking bottom to the reed. All right, now from this point out, it's basically sanding to make this look more and more like a reed. So I'm going to start with 220 grit sandpaper on a piece of either plexiglass or glass. Now when you sand the reed, you want to grab the reed on the ends, and you want to keep an even distribution of pressure, but you don't want to go back and forth. You want to do circles, or you want to do figure eights. This avoids the reed getting sanded too much on the ends. Now, how thick do you know to make your reed? Well, the thicker you make your reed, the softer the cane will be that is in the tip area of the reed. So if you play a V12 or a thick type reed, that reed is going to be cut deeper into the tube, so closer to the inner part, so the reed will actually be softer. That's why some people, when they purchase V12 or thick length D'Addario reeds, purchase reeds that are slightly harder. So I'm just going to sand and sand. Now at the factory, they use 220 grit sandpaper to finish the reed, but I would recommend going to at least 400. right, so now the blank is pretty much done. I'm going to do the sides just a little to smooth them out. So I'll hold the reed perpendicular and do both sides just to sort of smooth out the sides. The sides of the reed are called the rails. Now what I do this with 4 reeds, and then I immediately start putting them in my mouth and I start curing the reed. This is what a lot of people do with the commercial reed. When they get them, they start breaking them in. But the whole process of making reeds with from scratch is that you're going to be curing the reeds before you actually do that. So you'll never actually play a reed that is uncured. So this is our blank here. And what I'm going to do is just put that in my mouth and pretend that I've made 4 of those, because I have 3 here sitting over there. Now the next step, and I'll just hold it up here, is to remove the bark. And so what you want to do is place your knife right in the middle of the reed. You can take your homemade reed or commercial reed and you can sort of align them together and you can make a mark with a pencil and start that bark cut. So you want to remove all the bark from the reed. And I'm just cutting, letting the knife do the work and just removing the bark gently. Trying not to cut too deep at this point. So you can see that the bark is now removed from the reed. All right, so once you've removed the bark, the next step that you're going to do is you're going to do something we call duck bill the tip. You're going to take all the wood off the tip. And you're going to just do it by rotating your thumb like this and keeping your thumb behind the knife and rotating. So I'm going to go all the way down until I can see through the reed. All right, now I can see through this reed. All right, you can see that big angle right up in the front. All right, the next step is to draw on the reed the heart. I'll show you what that looks like. So it can be rough, it doesn't have to be too pretty. So there you have just a rough drawing of a heart. And what we're going to do is we're going to step the reed down. We're going to try to make little steps all the way down the reed to match up to that tip we just made. You can see from the side view that the tip is much thinner. So the first thing you do is you put the knife in the back of the reed and then you cut forward, you pull. Then you put the knife 1/8 of an inch in front of the cut you just made and you cut again. And then you put the knife again, and what we're doing is making little steps down the reed. And you keep working your way down the reed carefully, not to take off too much. I'm going to switch cameras to the top view. So now you can see that. So we've almost got steps down the side of the reed, moving forward like this. Trying to use your thumb, this is the hardest part, use your thumb to support the knife. And just push the knife with your thumb. We're not pushing with our wrist, we're using our thumb to push the knife. This is the hardest part to get good at. I recommend that you practice doing some of these techniques just with a knife. One of the things I have my students do is take a reed and we take a tube and we make it square on all 4 sides just to practice. See how that looks? That's a practice piece. So it's now square. We're not going to make a reed out of that. It's just to learn knife techniques. And on the other side of the reed tube, we just remove the bark just for practice. it's a lot of work to make blanks and then find out that you have no knife skills and you end up destroying a lot of your blanks. So, all right, so at this point, I'm going to wet the reed a lot in my mouth, and I'm going to put another reed in my mouth if I wasn't talking, and I'm going to go back and forth between the two, and I'm going to just start smoothing out those steps I made with long strokes of the knife, trying to keep the knife as close to your handle as possible. It gives you more control. All right, we're going to work this down. It's going to take about 10 minutes, which we don't have time today, but we'll work it down. Just keep working it down until, and every once in a while, look up at the light to see if you can see through the reed. All right, you'll notice it's starting to look like a reed little by little. All right, so since we have about 6 minutes left, we're going to move on. So if you don't think that that would be something you would want to do, and many of my students don't really want to do that either, what they end up doing is they use commercial machinery. So you can buy something called a profiler. This is a planer. This is a profiler. These tools do what we just did. So this tool here, we put that piece of split tube on, and we put a plane on, and we just remove the inner part of the tube. And these are set to make reeds that are a certain thickness, something like a V12. And you just keep shaving until there's no more wood coming off. All right, so that's a lot easier than what I showed you with a chisel. And then you put that piece that we made inside the profiler, because this profiler is going to give you the angled side shape of the reed. You center that in the profiler, and then you take a utility knife. You don't want to use your reed knife to do this because it will dull that too much. And then you're going to just remove the sides of the reed from the profiler that are sticking out or extruding from the sides. And this taper can be made wider or narrower depending on which brand of tool you buy. This particular one is making something similar to your standard traditional Van Doren reed. And when all that wood's shaved off, then you have a blank. Now that took a lot less time, so lots of people prefer to make reeds that way. Now, the next step would be what we did earlier, which was remove the bark, but since that is time consuming, lots of people like to use reed making machinery. This is my reed machine. You can use a reed-dual. There's all kinds of different machines. And what you do is you put your reed on the machine, and most have a template. This is a template on this machine of something like a German style thick blank reed. And what happens is most of the machines are tracing the profile. But what I discourage my students to do is to make a reed really fast, because by making really fast reeds, what you end up doing is basically making a commercial reed. So what I encourage them to do is make their reeds halfway, which I'll do right now. So what we're doing is we're cutting the blank by rotating and following the contour, and then lowering the blade with an adjustment screw. And now the reed's half made. So at that point, I would stop, and I would actually wet that reed in my mouth, and I would let it cure overnight, and then I would polish it on some glass with some sandpaper to make sure it hasn't warped. I want to try to get the reed to warp at this point. And I want to do that over 3 or 4 days. Then maybe after 3 days, I put it back on the machine and I lower the knife blade a little bit more. And I cut some more. Make sure it's centered. As you get near the end process, you want to make sure that everything is lined up perfectly, because the final cuts are really important. The average reed takes about 100 cuts. At Van Doren, reeds are made in about a second or two. Very quick process. And so we are done, and we have a reed now. You can take it off the machine and put it on your clarinet. So you put your reed on your clarinet, and you're going to clip it to strength.
Dr. Hudson?
And there you have it. So we just made reeds in 20 minutes, very fast, probably the fastest I've ever done it. So I hope you liked what you saw. If you want to have more information, we can talk more about reed adjusting. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, thereedmachine@gmail.com.